Master Gunnery Sergeant Vance Cutler's voice carried across the range like a death sentence. Put a rifle in her hands and she'll probably shoot herself in the foot before she hits anything downrange. Staff Sergeant Lennox Thorne was 28 years old and carried 3 scars on her forearm, one for every promise she'd carved into her own flesh after dragging 2 dying operators through a minefield while enemy rounds tore the ground apart around her. She'd killed 14 men in 18 minutes with a rifle just like the one Cutler was mocking her for holding, and she'd done it in conditions that would have made him piss himself and call for extraction. Cutler thought he was humiliating some affirmative action case who didn't belong in his range. He had no idea the 4 Navy officers watching from the black Suburban knew exactly who she was and that his career would be dead before the sun went down. The desert wind at Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton carried grit that stuck to everything. It was 0600 on a Tuesday in late September, and the rifle range stretched out under a sky still gray with pre-dawn light. Heat mirages would come later, but now the air was cool enough to see breath and the smell of gun oil mixed with dust and diesel exhaust from the Humvees parked behind the firing positions. Staff Sergeant Lennox Thorne stood at the 1,000-yard line with her M40A6 sniper rifle resting against her shoulder, the weapon's weight familiar as her own heartbeat. She was 5'7", lean in the way that came from years of carrying heavy packs over impossible terrain, with dark brown hair pulled back in a regulation bun and gray eyes that tracked movement the way a wolf watches prey. There was something about her stillness that unsettled people, not the rigidity of parade rest, but the absolute calm of someone who'd learned to control fear so completely it no longer registered as an emotion. She didn't look at the men gathered 30 meters behind her. She could feel their skepticism like heat coming off asphalt. Master Gunnery Sergeant Vance Cutler stood among them, arms crossed, jaw working a piece of gum. He was 46, barrel-chested, with 24 years in the Corps and a reputation for running the toughest scout sniper screening program on the West Coast. Next to him stood 3 junior Marines, Lance Corporals, who'd earned their spots through Cutler's grueling selection process and now watched Thorne with the kind of cold assessment that came from men who believed she was taking a slot that should have gone to one of them.
But there were others present. 4 men in desert utilities, without name tapes, standing apart from Cutler's group near a black Suburban that hadn't been there an hour ago. Navy officers, senior officers. 3 wore the eagles of captains, equivalent to Marine colonels, and 1 wore the silver oak leaves of a commander. One of them held a tablet and kept glancing between its screen and Thorne's position.
Thorne touched the scars on her forearm. 3 clean lines, parallel and deliberate, then settled into her shooting position. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, welcome to Military Stories. And if this story matters to you, make sure you're subscribed, because these are the stories that need to be told. The range safety officer's voice crackled over the loudspeaker, calling the line ready. Thorne's breathing slowed. Her heart rate dropped. Everything else disappeared. She had no idea that in the next 3 hours, the secret she'd been protecting for 6 months was about to detonate in her face. Lennox Thorne grew up in Fossil, Oregon, population 73, where her father ran a gunsmithing shop out of a barn behind their house, and her mother worked as a surgical nurse at the regional hospital 40 miles away. She learned to shoot at 6, learned to hunt at 8, and by 12 could field strip and reassemble an M1 Garand blindfolded because her father believed understanding machinery was understanding discipline. The real lesson came when she was 14. Her father took her deer hunting in the Ochako Mountains during a November snowstorm. They were 4 miles from the truck when she took a shot at a muley buck at 300 yards, rushed it, jerked the trigger, and missed clean. The buck vanished into the timber, and her father made her sit in the snow for an hour in silence, watching the empty space where the animal had been. He told her that in shooting, like in life, you only got one chance to do it right. After that, you lived with what you'd done. She never rushed another shot. At 18, she enlisted in the Marine Corps. At 20, she volunteered for Marine reconnaissance training. At 22, she was selected for a Joint Special Operations Task Force, one that pooled operators from MARSOC, SEAL Team 6, and Delta Force for missions in places the United States officially wasn't operating.
Helmand Province, Afghanistan, March 2021. The mission was supposed to be simple overwatch. Thorne and her spotter, a Force Recon Gunnery Sergeant named Brooks, positioned on a ridgeline providing security for a Delta team, extracting a high-value target from a compound 2 kilometers north. The operation went smooth until the Delta team's exfil helicopter took an RPG through the tail rotor and went down hard in a wadi half a click from Thorne's position. Brooks called it in. Command said a quick reaction force was 20 minutes out. The Taliban fighters swarming toward the crash site would be there in 5. Thorne and Brooks abandoned their hide and ran, not away but toward the crash. They reached the crashed bird and found 2 Delta operators alive but pinned down, one with a compound femur fracture, the other with shrapnel through his abdomen and visible intestinal protrusion. The Taliban were advancing from 3 directions, using a dry riverbed for cover. Moving fast and professionally, Thorne set up in a shallow depression, put Brooks on security, and started working. She dropped 14 Taliban fighters in 18 minutes, ranges from 200 to 600 meters, all headshots or high thoracic cavity hits, shooting through gaps in cover that existed for less than 2 seconds. She felt her heartbeat in her fingertips, felt the trigger break like glass, watched through her scope as men dropped and didn't get back up. Brooks died holding security, took a burst from a PKM machine gun while covering Thorne's right flank. The rounds punched through his plate carrier at an upward angle, caught him in the subclavian artery. He bled out in 90 seconds. Thorne tried to get a tourniquet high enough on his shoulder, couldn't, the anatomy didn't allow it. She held pressure with both hands and felt his blood pump hot between her fingers until it stopped. The 2 Delta operators survived. Thorne dragged them both, one at a time, 400 meters, through a minefield to the QRF's landing zone. Her forearm got sliced open on concertina wire she hadn't seen in the dark. Later in the medical tent, while waiting for the corpsman to stitch her up, she took a scalpel and carved 3 parallel lines into her arm just above the wire cut. 1 for Brooks, 2 for the men she'd saved, a reminder that every shot mattered because someone's life was always on the line. The task force commander put her in for a Navy Cross. The award citation was sanitized, most of the operational details redacted. Her service record was scrubbed of references to the task force. She was reassigned to a training command at Camp Pendleton under administrative cover, with orders to stay out of sight until the political heat from the Afghanistan withdrawal cooled down. That was 6 months ago. She'd been invisible ever since, just another staff sergeant running rifle qualifications and teaching new Marines how to zero their optics, until Gunnery Sergeant Cutler decided she needed to be put in her place. Vance Cutler wasn't a bad Marine. That made it worse. He'd earned his rank the hard way. 2 deployments to Iraq, 1 to Afghanistan, a Bronze Star with V device for pulling a wounded Lance Corporal out of a burning vehicle in Ramadi. He believed in standards. Believed the Marine Corps should be hard because war was harder. Believed that lowering expectations to make anyone feel included was a betrayal of everyone who'd bled to earn the title. And he believed that women didn't belong in combat arms. He'd never say it officially, knew better, but everyone in his unit understood where he stood. When Staff Sergeant Thorne showed up on his range 3 weeks ago with orders assigning her as an assistant instructor, Cutler smiled, shook her hand, and made a quiet phone call to his battalion sergeant major, asking if there'd been some kind of administrative mistake. There hadn't been, so he handled it professionally. He gave her the worst shifts, the most tedious administrative work, kept her away from actual shooting instruction, waited for her to quit or request a transfer. She didn't. Instead, she showed up early, stayed late, and ran every safety brief and range detail with the kind of mechanical competence that was impossible to criticize. She barely spoke, didn't complain, didn't socialize. It drove him insane. Then, 2 days ago, Lance Corporal DeHaven, one of Cutler's top students, mentioned that he'd seen Staff Sergeant Thorne shooting alone on range 14 after hours. Said she'd put 10 rounds into a target at 800 yards in under 90 seconds, all hits center mass using backup iron sights instead of optics. Cutler didn't believe it. He also couldn't let it go. So he arranged this demonstration. told Thorne that since she was assigned to his sniper screening program, she needed to prove she met minimum standards. Official qualification at 1,000 yards, 5 rounds. The passing score was 3 hits in the black. He made sure the entire instructor staff was present, made sure the junior Marines were watching, made sure everyone understood this wasn't about qualification, it was about proving a point. What Cutler didn't know was that the 4 Navy officers standing near the black Suburban weren't random visitors. They were Captain Marcus Hale, Captain Vincent Shaw, Captain David Ukes, and Commander Naomi Trent, all SEAL command staff from Naval Special Warfare Group 1, all veterans of Joint Special Operations Command, and all people who knew exactly who Lennox Thorne really was. They'd come to Camp Pendleton for a routine liaison meeting with Marine Special Operations Command and heard through the network that someone was about to publicly humiliate one of their former task force operators. They decided to watch. Cutler stood with his arms crossed, gum snapping between his teeth, and raised his voice so everyone could hear. He said that standards were standards, and if Staff Sergeant Thorne wanted to teach Marines how to shoot, she needed to prove she could do it herself under pressure, in front of witnesses, without excuses. Lance Corporal Vickers, a kid with a sunburned neck and a smirk that made him look younger than 20, mentioned something about diversity hires and box checking. Cutler didn't correct him. Thorne settled into a shooting position, checked her data book, adjusted her scope for wind and elevation based on the mirage she could see downrange and the flag angle at the 500-yard marker. Her hands were steady, her breathing was controlled. Behind her, Captain Hale whispered something to Captain Shaw. Shaw shook his head, smiled slightly. This was going to be ugly, just not the way Cutler expected. Thorne didn't think about Cutler, didn't think about the Marines watching her or the officers who'd somehow materialized behind the firing line. She thought about Brooks, not the abstract idea of him, the specific memory. The sound his breathing had made in those final 90 seconds. Wet, labored. The sound of a punctured lung filling with blood. The way his hand had gripped her wrist, then gone slack. The way his eyes had stayed open after he died, staring at nothing until she'd reached up and closed them with fingers slick with his blood. She'd made a promise over his body while waiting for the QRF. Told his corpse, because that's all that was left, that every shot she took for the rest of her life would mean something, would be precise, would honor what he'd taught her. Cutler thought this was a test of her competency. It wasn't. It was a continuation of a conversation she'd been having with a dead man for 3 years.
She pressed her cheek against the stock, let her body settle into the dirt, and felt the rifle become an extension of her skeleton. Her pulse was 58 beats per minute. Her breathing was 6 seconds in, hold, 6 seconds out. The target was 1,000 yards downrange, a paper silhouette barely visible even through the scope, shimmering in the heat haze that was starting to build as the sun climbed higher. She'd made this shot 1,000 times in training, made it for real in Helmand, with rounds snapping past her head and the smell of burning fuel and blood in her nostrils, but never when it carried this much weight. Because if she missed, if she gave Cutler even one reason to dismiss her, the 6 months of silence, of hiding, of pretending to be someone smaller and quieter than she really was, would be wasted. Her finger found the trigger. 2.5 pounds of pressure on a factory trigger she tuned herself, smooth, consistent. She didn't pray, she didn't hope. She just did the work Brooks had taught her to do. The first shot broke clean. The sound rolled across the range, echoing off the berms downrange. The spotter in the observation tower keyed his radio. Hit center mass, 10 ring. Cutler's jaw tightened. Beside him, Lance Corporal Vickers stopped smirking. Thorne cycled the bolt, ejected the brass, chambered another round, didn't rush, let her breathing settle. The wind had shifted. She could feel it on her left cheek, approximately 3 miles per hour. Quartering from the northwest. She dialed in 0.5 milliradian of windage. Second shot. Hit. Center mass. X-ring. The range went quiet. Even the Marines, who'd been talking in low voices behind the safety line, stopped. Captain Hale, standing 30 meters back with the other Navy officers, pulled out his phone and made a call, spoke quietly, nodded, and ended it. Cutler watched the target through his binoculars, his knuckles white against the rubberized housing.
Thorne fired 3 more rounds in 4 minutes. Every single one punched through the black. The final shot, taken with a wind gust that made the flag snap horizontal, went through the exact center of the target, obliterating the previous hole. "Perfect score," the range officer called it over the loudspeaker. "Qualification complete. Expert marksman." Thorne cleared her weapon, locked the bolt to the rear, stood, brushed the dust off her uniform. Cutler walked toward her. His face was red, not from the sun. He told her that qualification scores didn't mean anything in real-world conditions, that shooting a static target on a flat range with no time pressure wasn't the same as combat. If she really wanted to prove she belonged in his program, she'd need to pass the full pre-scout sniper indoctrination, a 72-hour field exercise designed to break candidates before they even got to formal sniper school. He said it started in 1 hour, said she could decline with no professional consequences, go back to her regular instructor duties, and everyone would forget this ever happened, or she could ruck up and find out what real standards looked like. Thorne looked at him for 3 long seconds. Then she said she'd be ready.
The indoctrination started at 800. 12 candidates, 11 men, 1 woman. 60-pound rucksacks, 15-mile movement to contact across the Camp Pendleton backcountry, followed by a series of tactical problems, navigation exercises, and shooting drills designed to test performance under complete exhaustion. Cutler led from the front, set a pace that was just shy of running, didn't call brakes. By mile 5, 2 candidates had dropped, heat casualties unable to keep pace in the climbing temperature. By mile 8, Thorne's shoulders were screaming. The ruck straps had rubbed her collarbones raw, even through her blouse. Her boots were soaked with sweat. Her lower back felt like someone was driving nails into her spine with every step. But her breathing stayed steady. Her pace stayed consistent. Lance Corporal Vickers was struggling. She could see it in the way he stumbled on the downhills, the way his ruck sagged to one side, the way his face had gone gray under the dirt and sweat. At mile 10, Cutler stopped the formation and announced a navigation problem. Each candidate had to move solo to a checkpoint 2 kilometers north using only a map and compass, then establish a hide position and engage targets at unknown distances between 400 and 700 meters. Time limit, 90 minutes. Thorne checked her map, shot an azimuth with her lensatic compass, and moved out. The terrain was brutal. Steep ravines choked with chaparral, loose shale that slid underfoot and made every step a calculated risk. She navigated by terrain association, used the sun position to verify her compass bearing, moved fast but careful. She reached her checkpoint in 42 minutes, set up in a shallow depression overlooking the target array, ranged the targets using mil-dot reticle measurements in her scope. 420 meters, 560 meters, 680 meters. Engaged all 3. All hits. Cutler arrived at her position 18 minutes later with the cadre. He checked her targets through a spotting scope, didn't say anything, just marked her scorecard and moved to the next checkpoint. By hour 60 of the 72-hour indoctrination, Thorne had outperformed every other candidate in every measurable category. Navigation accuracy, marksmanship scores, observation and reporting drills, land navigation under time pressure. And Cutler hated her for it. On the final night, during a brief rest period, he pulled her aside and told her that being good at individual tasks didn't make someone a good Marine, that the Corps needed people who could lead under fire, who could inspire trust in their teams, who belonged. He didn't say she didn't belong, he didn't have to. The final event was a stalk. Each candidate had to move undetected across 800 meters of open terrain, get within 200 meters of an observation post manned by instructor cadre, and take a pair of shots at designated targets without being spotted. If the cadre saw you, if they could identify your position before you fired, you failed. Thorne started her stalk at 5:30 a.m., just before dawn, moved on her belly through the brush, using every depression and shadow, inching forward 6 feet at a time. It took her 90 minutes to cover the distance. She found her final firing position in a cluster of manzanita bushes, settled in, ranged her targets with her scope, and fired 2 shots. 2 hits.
From the observation post, Staff Sergeant Paloma, one of the cadre instructors, keyed his radio and reported that he'd registered the shots but could not identify the shooter's position. Cutler, listening on the command net, didn't believe it. He told Paloma to grid the area and physically search. Paloma did, found nothing. Cutler walked out to the search area himself, stood 8 feet from Thorne's hide, and swept the terrain with binoculars, scanning methodically, looking for any sign of disturbance. Still didn't see her.
She waited until he turned away, then stood up, brushed off the camouflage netting she'd constructed from natural vegetation, and walked out of the bushes. Cutler spun around, stared. His face went pale. She'd been right there the entire time.
That's when the black Suburban rolled up. Captain Marcus Hale stepped out, followed by the 3 other Navy officers. They'd been observing from a distance for portions of the past 3 days, monitoring the entire indoctrination. Hale walked straight to Cutler, extended his hand, introduced himself by rank and name. Captain Marcus Hale, Naval Special Warfare Group 1. Then he asked Cutler if he knew who he'd been trying to break for the past 72 hours. Cutler said she was Staff Sergeant Thorne, an instructor assigned to his screening program. Hale's expression didn't change. He told Cutler that her name was Staff Sergeant Lennox Thorne, former attached operator with a Joint Special Operations Command Task Force, recipient of the Navy Cross for actions in Helmand Province, where she was credited with 14 enemy kills in a single engagement while under direct fire, and responsible for saving the lives of 2 critically wounded Delta Force operators during a contested casualty evacuation under enemy contact. He told Cutler that Thorne had a service record that included qualifications most SEALs never achieved, and that her shooting performance in the task force's internal assessments had placed her in the top 3% of all Special Operations designated marksmen across all branches. He told Cutler that the only reason she was at Camp Pendleton running basic rifle qualifications was because the Marine Corps had placed her in administrative holding following the Afghanistan withdrawal while her clearances were updated and her next assignment was determined. And he told Cutler that publicly humiliating a decorated combat veteran in front of junior Marines wasn't maintaining standards. It was an abuse of authority that reflected poorly on his judgment and his fitness to hold a leadership position in a training command. Cutler stood frozen, his mouth open. Nothing came out. Captain Shaw stepped forward and informed Cutler that a formal complaint had been filed with his battalion commander regarding his conduct during the qualification shoot and the subsequent indoctrination. There would be an investigation. His role as chief instructor for the Scout Sniper Screening Program was suspended pending the outcome. Hale turned to Thorne. He asked if she was ready to come back to work, said there was a training development cell at Naval Special Warfare that could use someone with her background. Thorne looked at Cutler, then at Lance Corporal Vickers and the other junior Marines who'd been watching from a distance, their faces pale with shock. She told Hale she appreciated the offer, but she had unfinished business at Pendleton. There were Marines here who needed to learn how to shoot properly. She'd made a promise to someone that her work would mean something. She intended to keep it. Hale nodded, told her the door was always open when she was ready. Then the 4 Navy officers climbed back into the Suburban and drove away, leaving Cutler standing alone in the dirt with his entire world collapsing around him.
2 weeks later, Master Gunnery Sergeant Vance Cutler was reassigned to Marine Corps Air Station Miramar in a logistics support billet. Not a formal demotion, just a quiet removal from any position involving training or leadership development. Staff Sergeant Lennox Thorne was promoted to Gunnery Sergeant and assumed the role of Chief Instructor for the Scout Sniper Screening Program. Her first class had 14 candidates, 2 women. She ran them exactly the way Cutler had, hard, unforgiving, with no allowances for weakness or excuses. But she also taught them what Brooks had taught her, that shooting wasn't about ego or proving dominance. It was about precision under pressure, about making the one shot that mattered when someone's life depended on it. Lance Corporal Vickers was in that first class. He didn't drop, didn't quit, worked harder than anyone else because he'd learned that underestimating someone based on demographics instead of demonstrated capability was the fastest way to fail at everything that mattered. On the final day of the indoctrination, Vickers passed his stock. Thorne walked out to his position afterward, told him he'd done solid work and that he had potential if he was willing to check his assumptions at the door and stay humble. He asked her if the story was true, if she'd really saved 2 Delta operators in Afghanistan. She told him that what mattered wasn't what she'd done in the past. What mattered was what every Marine did right now, in this moment, when the shot had to count and there were no second chances. Then she handed him his scorecard and moved on to the next candidate.
That night, alone in her quarters, Thorne sat on her rack and ran her fingers over the 3 scars on her forearm, 1 for Brooks, 2 for the men she'd saved. She didn't know if he'd be proud of what she was doing now, teaching instead of operating, staying quiet instead of seeking recognition. But she knew he'd understand, because every Marine she trained to shoot clean, to think clearly under pressure, to value precision over pride, every single one of them was another life that might be saved when it mattered most, and that was enough. She turned off the light, closed her eyes, and let the desert wind rattle the window while she slept.